All right, so I think we're ready to go ahead and get started on today's presentation. I'm going to start you off on this presentation, and then as soon as Heather gets here, she's going to take over, and she's going to be so much more exciting and engaging than I could ever dream to be. I would imagine Heather's moments away from getting here. At least I keep praying in my mind she's moments away from getting here. So today is really, it's all about that regional market potential analysis that we conducted. And we're going to go over a whole host of things. Heather has a really robust presentation already created, and it's going to look at the results. It's going to walk you through a pretty comprehensive blueprint for taking action and really starting to look at the issues as well as the opportunities that you face as we look as large scale community development of housing here over the next decade. And you got to remember, we didn't get in this situation overnight. It wasn't just all of a sudden we decided, hey, we don't have enough homes here. There's all these people coming and we don't have enough homes. I mean, largely our population is decreasing, over the last several years, and we're still tight on homes. And that's because we just haven't built at the level that we really had the potential to do that. And if you think about the existing homes as they become blighted and eyesores, we tear them down and we don't have a good replacement or infill project or program that really has rebuilt those homes that were once eyesores in our communities. More often than not, if you drive around any community within any of our counties, what do you see in what was once densely populated streets with homes? You see vacant parcels. You see side lots now. So in town, they tore a house down and somebody said, I'll take that lot and I'll keep it up. And, for the city at that point in time, it was a great deal for them. They no longer had to really worry about maintaining it, but they missed out on that opportunity for that new resident to come and live in their city, to grow their tax base, and to continue to keep, prospering as a municipality. So what we're going to look at today is really the results of this study and kind of how we're going to be able to keep growing in with that. So this is the region again that the analysis was done. That's different than the Homes for the Future region, but we looked at a 7-county area for this market potential analysis. And the key word that I keep saying that you really need to focus on is the potential here. Given everything that we have going for us, the information that you're going to see and learn and hear about today is our potential. And it's a conservative potential, and it's still a huge, massive number that we're going to go over and talk about. So Montgomery County and Putnam County are added back into this region, and they'll continue to be a part of this region as we go forward with any kind of studies in with that. Our consultants were Zimmerman Voke and Associates, so they're a national firm. They're based out in New Jersey. They've worked on more than 600 different studies. We had a phenomenal meeting with them just the other day. Started off a little slow because these guys and gals, they just get into this data so much. They geek out on this stuff, and sometimes I have to just kind of say, hey, I need you to dumb it down a little bit because you guys are in this deep. And but they are very well renowned and well respected, and they're one of the only consultants in all of the United States that does this proprietary market potential analysis. Everybody else looks at supply and demand models, but supply and demand models are always looking in the past. It's never calculating what your future potential is and what individuals' propensity is to move to your area if they had the right housing. And it also doesn't capture what an individual's preferences are to move up or move down in their current housing situation given the right housing existed in their area. I don't know how many people are familiar with the duplexes that are going in along Fruit Ridge and kind of Poplar and Ohio Street over here in Terre Haute. But there's a whole section of duplexes that are going in. And those things have been selling like hotcakes. And I kind of walk over, our offices are close by, and every now and then, I don't get bored, but every now and then I'll go out for a stroll and I'll kind of pop in and kind of look at it. And I've chatted with a lot of the homeowners there. And a lot of them are empty nesters who had big homes and they were ready to downsize. And they were ready to, I'd ask them, I said, how long have you been looking to downsize? Hey, Heather, how long have you been looking to downsize? And they have said, we have been wanting to downsize for the last 3 to 5 years, and there just hasn't been the right housing available for us to do it. But as soon as this housing came on, we said it was time, and we jumped ship, and boom. So that is a good indicator that we have a high degree of market potential within our area. But that's just one small kind of example, and what we're talking about is on a regional scale with lots of opportunities. So you've listened to me stall and ramble on long enough, and I am now going to turn this over to our very wonderful Heather Presley-Cowan.
Thank you, Ryan.
Oh.
All right, can you still hear me okay? All right. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for waiting. I have not had a flat tire that I could ever remember in my life, and today, despite leaving an hour and a half early from my town of Fort Wayne, Indiana, I'm a half hour late, so thanks for your patience. So I'm really excited to share with you the information we're going to talk about today, and we called it a workshop because it needs to be conversational. And what we're talking about today, a lot of times when we talk about housing, we think of built environments and structures, but at the end of the day, how many business owners do we have in the room? So when we think about our customers, business owners, who do you design for, right? The person. And so this analysis that I'm going to share about is really just the beginning, but it actually begins with the end in mind, because we're going to understand who our prospective buyers are, who our prospective renters are, what kind of preferences they have. And this was actually completed by a group I personally have worked with for many years. For those who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, I spent the better part of my career in housing, working for a very long time with the second largest city of Indiana, Fort Wayne, as its first housing and neighborhood development director. It is there where I learned that this firm does what it does, which is a national product put together by some really awesome planners, but it's not really common in Indiana. So one more question before we get started. How many are from governments? Government leaders. Wow. Okay, great. And how many are nonprofits? Oh, good, good. Okay. Economic development. All right. Realtors? Banks? Gosh, you've got it all. Okay, so what we do today, again, we're calling it a workshop because this is where we all get to work together as we move forward. So you may have heard of housing studies. This is not a housing study that's been done. It's actually a measurement of market potential, and that's different from demand. When we think about demand, we actually have a product and we've got people lining up the door to come and get it or not. And that kind of is a metric for demand. So an apartment complex and housing that has a waiting list would be considered to be in demand. A development that has more buyers ready than housing units to sell is another metric for demand. But potential is something different. Potential says you may not have this product on your shelves today. The people who want to buy from you can't see that product on the market, and therefore you don't see them show up at any doors because the product isn't there. And so as we talk about market potential, this is very different from demand, and it's complementary to demand in a lot of ways. So this idea of looking at housing from a regional perspective comes from this idea that any community planners in the room that have to measure, anybody deal with stormwater? How do you measure stormwater, right? It rolls off the roof and hits the ground and then goes somewhere. Well, like water runs, it doesn't stop at some jurisdictional limit. Housing is the same way. It's possible that we could be building housing over here and we could be building it over there, but ultimately where we decide to build and how much we build, we can get to a point of saturation where we're overbuilt, and now we have to do something about it. And so looking at the 7-county region there's a lot of wisdom in that, but here's the first data point. All regional counties lost population between 2010 and 2020 census. So what would that normally tell a community? You're losing population, what should you do? Certainly not build, right? Plan to shut down. And so this idea of measuring demand versus potential really plays a big role. So what we know about the region today is that it's 42% empty nesters and retirees, and then about 58% traditional and non-traditional families and younger and single couples. I call these two groups millennials. So 42, 58 empty nesters to millennials. There's a lot of information that's going to be in here, and I want to point to this because actually you've probably seen the website that has all of this in spades and more. But what the analysis does is actually breaks out each of these counties, and it's really important as we delve into what's happening next that we look at certain things like that net migration in and out to understand just how powerful market potential can be. But also as you look at the makeup of those units, it starts to play a big role in terms of the households as you look at where we're going to go to move forward. Also in terms of the current market, so older stock is going for less than $1 a foot. Developers in the room? Realtors? So when we think about the stock that's sitting on the market today, the price points typically, I mean, you were in Indiana, is going to be for a home that's for sale, say 125 to 150. Right? That's about market. Recently, building that's gone on shows $1 to $1.50 per square foot, but very little new construction. For sale, again, we've got under $100 a square foot for older stock, and then, as you can see, recently it started to move up. New construction is mostly detached. That's Indiana, and then $175 to $200 per square foot for larger units. So some of the things that Zimmerman Volk saw as an issue was, number one, population decline, which we all would say that's an issue, and why would we go out and study whether we have market potential if we're already seeing decline? But when we start to look at the issues we need to address in at least keeping and stemming the decline, retaining younger households is always key. The current market rents need to be looked at, and I'll show you why this is a big deal. But then there are some ideas on how to look at for sale units as well. So I mentioned market potential, and when we delve into this, I'll be interested in kind of hearing from the group what you think. Are you seeing this? So market potential, we're looking at where do these folks live now? So this is this invisible group of people who would live here, but they can't find the product on the shelf. How many are likely to move to the region? So we want to quantify that. Who are they? Their tapestry. What are their housing preferences? Do they want a hard loft or a soft loft? Do they want a single family detached or multifamily? How much are they likely to pay? What should those rents and prices be in terms of, that's going to actually help to customize what we're building? And then how fast are they going to rent or buy these new units that are produced? So in terms of where these folks live now, 63% are coming from within the county where the market potential exists. So when we think about if we are going to build to the market potential, there's 63% that are already living here now, and they either want to downsize to, let's say, a more accessible unit, maybe a one-floor, single-story, or they want to upgrade to a larger unit. They're maybe a growing family, and so they want a bigger unit, but they're already living there. So what does that tell us about if these folks start to move around, what happens to the houses that they buy or rent? Right, so we've got a multiplier effect that happens here. For every unit we create for these folks, we know that we're actually creating 1.6 units, right? Because that unit that they're living in becomes available on the market. And how much is that house going to be priced at? Is it going to be at the $300,000 price point they're looking to buy at? Probably not. It's probably going to be at the median value of that 125 to 150. And so when we think about housing being affordable, if you look at a mortgage today, even in Indiana, for a house that costs 125 to 150,000, it's cheaper than rent, right? Even in Indiana. So 11% are coming around the 7 counties. So they're moving from county to county. 8% are coming from Marion, Hendricks, Tippecanoe, Greene, Owen, Fountain counties. So yes, we have people who want to live here that are settling for counties around us. And then this number is always interesting to me. Balance of the United States, close to 20% coming from the balance of the United States. So where are these folks and what are they looking at? Well, a lot of communities that have gotten too expensive, states that have gotten too expensive, have become the first population who wants to look at Indiana as a place to live. And so you have about almost 20% is coming from the balance of the United States. Now again, this is a workshop and we're gonna dialogue and discuss, but I want to encourage you to ask me questions. If something doesn't make sense, feel free to just raise a hand, okay? So how many people would move to this region if that housing was available?
Going back to both of those, I see sometimes, because I do some financing up in Indianapolis as well, into the DR Horton and the Hyatt homes,
Right.
versus down here where we don't have those large cookie cutter subdivisions. A lot of the builders in here I would classify as a
Custom builders, okay.
And that is also too where the disconnect is between the price per square foot.
Yeah.
When you're a cookie cutter DR Horton, where you're putting up 7 homes at one time.
Right.
In a 50 unit or 100 unit subdivision, they can get materials cheaper.
Yep.
Their finishes aren't nearly as good. They're cheaper finishes. But then at the same time, you've got comps constantly revolving, buying and selling.
There's a
So
secret.
that subdivision creates its own comps because the homes are constantly moving.
Love this.
Take a subdivision like Idletree. There's not a lot of new homes going in.
Yep.
But they're selling some of the old ones, but the comps, they're not revolving constantly. And I think that's where, we're looking at it on a region scale here, but we're not taking into account other factors that are going on in other places that we could try to implement down.
Yes, so question there. So you just heard, again, a whole stack of things you can do right there. One, if we want to change the appraisal situation, we play the same game, but we have to have quantity. So 7 at a time, or I say a catalyst, we're gonna talk about catalyst sites, 30 to 40 units that we look at a time. Any builder in here that could take that kind of capacity? Do you have a capacity to build 30, 40 units? Good. We need as many of those as we can, and guess what? If we don't have it locally, could we aggregate sites and say, hey, look, we're one region, but we've got 4 sites for you? Yes. And then we bring in bigger production builders. The idea here, though, is we're going to keep it focused on the customer and making sure that it's available and affordable in the way that they need it. And so we're dialing back into those numbers that we just talked about, which are much easier to hit than if we said, gosh, we're gonna have to go after a lot of big A affordable housing tools because we are gonna need to actually create a different rent structure or affordability structure.
I have another question on affordability.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've addressed this in your data, but with the population aging,
Yeah.
a lot of them are moving to fixed incomes.
Yes.
And a lot of them that I talk to at least aren't able to qualify for a mortgage anymore.
Yeah.
Because of the debt to income ratio.
Yeah.
But a landlord doesn't have that. So somebody that's making $1,200 a month in Social Security
Right.
can't qualify for a mortgage.
Right.
Even at a $50,000 mortgage, because it's too much of where the rates are. But they can go get $1,000 a month rent payment because the landlord doesn't care what their disposal is.
Just pay it.
As long as you make $1,000 a month rent payment, you're fine.
Yep.
What's going to be done?
So as we start,
Is there anything to protect those fixed income people?
oh yeah.
From rent going continuously up on them?
Any senior affordable housing developers in the room? Anyone that deals with tax credits, do you deal with seniors? There's at least one important tool, and that's the low-income housing tax credit program, but in Indiana it's completely oversubscribed. But it is that you can design a completely senior development that is focused on those aspects and can be very service rich and that kind of thing. And that's, as we start to look at, okay, we've got masses that we're talking about with these 5,000 units, right? Are we counting that population necessarily? It may not show up in here, right? So there may be more niche types of housing that needs to be available. And how many employers are expanding? What kind of job creation do we have going on? Hundreds? How many would you say, how many jobs?
1,000 plus.
1,000 plus, not in here. Where are they gonna live? Right, yeah.
How has it factored in the Indiana Economic Development Corporation on how they're making their investments? Because it looks like it's very narrow and not in rural areas. Has that been factored into how this?
Yes. Let's delve into that, because that's my direct experience actually with the last READI round. Those are two examples. I have one example in here of that. So when we think about housing regionally, there is a regional layer of work that has to be done. It's things like this where we're all coming together, and then you go back into your areas and you may work one county or multiple counties. But the idea is there are some things that can happen at the regional level. And when READI was put out to regions, it made sense to me from a housing perspective, which, as I understand, is one of the big money getters from IEDC, is funding that regional plan implementation is the number one thing we can do. Is how do we aggregate our collective interest in this housing issue and go after more resources than we could if we did it by ourselves. Second, collaboration with implementation partners, and there are many. So all of you. And so the idea that we're bringing everyone together to start talking about this, and that there's a housing committee that's discussing this, key. We're going to need banks, we're going to need builders, we're going to need lenders, we're going to need loans and down payment assistance, we're going to need Fannie and Freddie, we're going to need all of that. But the idea is at the regional level, can we create a toolkit that you can pull from, and as we start to then measure, we're able to see things, the needles start to move. So we're measuring at the regional level. Well, that means we're going to look when maybe money is doled out. We're going to look at consistency with the market potential. And maybe, and I'll show you a really good case of how nonprofits can actually become an instrumentality of housing in terms of optimizing the market potential in really cool ways. So providing technical assistance even to the private sector partners and the governments alike. This is all based on a methodology that I learned and have all the bumps and bruises to prove it from all of my years inside of Fort Wayne, but also teaching nonprofits, housing developers how to do this with the really difficult federal funds. But also, for the last 7 years, have been out running housing strategies with communities, and it really boils down to this idea of public-private partnerships, really high performance public-private partnerships. So today, we need thousands of units. It doesn't mean we're gonna go drop in. Clay County doesn't wanna be a part of it, but we're just gonna throw a bunch of houses in Clay County. No, the answer is Clay County wants to be a part of this, then Clay County will become a part of this, and its community wants, needs, and desires here, combined with what the private sector partners can reasonably do, which is normally over here, right? I want the sun and the moon and the stars, and it's going to cost you this, and wow, you're trying to pick our pockets, right? But it's really pushing those two sectors together and saying we are going to optimize and empower. We're going to optimize the housing market potential by building enough of the housing that buyers seek to buy and renters seek to rent at the price points they can afford. But we're going to empower all of our partners, the banks, the lenders, the builders, the developers, the realtors, to come together and do what they do best while we remove those barriers. Who did I mention? Who did I not mention in that word, in that conversation? Did I miss anybody? Government, yes. They are the epicenter of the home method. Why I worked in government, I saw how it could be done, I documented it and demonstrated it, and we're now going to do this here. So let's look at what this toolkit looks like. It's It's really going to look differently wherever. Why? Because every community, every downtown, every county, every region is different. But there are things that we can do that fall into in the categories of projects and programs that can really get this kicked off. Number one, a pattern book for the region. Now, I'm going to show you some examples of what I mean by this, but when we start to think about housing for a different population or generation that wants different things, we have to start thinking about what they want and building what they want and are willing to pay for. County-wide housing strategies. The region can say, yes, we need thousands and thousands of units, but each county can then go into its own planning mode, its own leadership coming together and saying, we're going to get our market potential in. If anybody else wants to give us some too, we'll do that. And so a county-wide housing strategy, again, regionally, there's no one's going to come and do anything to or for a county, but we are going to facilitate an infrastructure for housing production that builds a mile-long pipeline of units and hopefully a 2-mile line pipeline of home buyers. Why did I just mention home buyers? We want people to set down roots. But what's the number one gateway for bringing a home buyer in that will eventually set down roots and buy a home? And where are they going to live? Apartments. I'm going to go and live in this downtown, and ooh, I actually love it here. Gosh, I'm going to buy a house right over there. So we need to be looking at getting people to set down roots that get those jobs here or can work anywhere they want to, which is a big population now. And we do that through catalyst sites. The ideal catalyst sites we'll talk about here, but those are 3 big things that we can do in the projects area to get things moving within the region. But again, it's all local control. So this is no one's doing anything to anyone. The next set are programs. And so when we think about programs, it's smaller scale because catalysts are designed to counteract some of those market forces. If I can get comps, if I can get enough scale that I can actually get those comps for the bank, I've been told, you want to do that downtown deal? And the bank only sees the $800 a month rents, but you can get $2,250. You could get, there are different tools you can use that can become a part of your toolkit, like a master lease agreement that would allow you to say, okay, now that bank's going to underwrite that deal, and all it did was take off someone's balance sheet. I saw a global employer decide to do something like that. So upper floor conversion and renovation programs, let's make sure our downtowns are strong. Quality of place, quality of life, lots of activity. It's where young folks want to be. And so making sure that not only, it's what I do every time I go into a town, you see a really cool downtown and all these great eateries, and I always want to look up because oftentimes what I see above those really cool eateries and coffee shops, boards. Those are perfect opportunities for rentals. And some of the most expensive rentals in many of the communities I've seen. And so this idea of having a program focused on upper floor conversions, small scale developers. What about those developers that only do 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 units a year? Help them to get involved in this and make sure that we've got something for them that lets them know that they're an important part of this, because producing 30, 40, 50, 100 thousands of units, it still needs to be complemented by the small scale developers. And then finally, down payment assistance. We've talked about it. It is the millennial homebuyer issue, and making sure that we have some sort of tool available for them, or tools available from banks and lenders, is critical. So here's an example of the pattern book I mentioned. Each of these is an example of a fourplex, is what I would call it. Fourplex. 4 units, so 4 apartments, or it could be I own 1 and rent out 3, small scale developer type. But these are some examples that you could use in your pattern book to show scale without scaring people. Because when we talk about multifamily, we usually think about these gargantuan complexes of 160 units. We don't necessarily think of small groups, right? A community that looks like this, you can't tell the difference between a fourplex and a single family. It's the traditional neighborhood, actually, if you think about the way normal neighborhoods were built way back when. What do you think about that? That's just one example. These look scary. Or have you seen these before? Does this come to mind when I said multifamily? Hmm?
Ours are in more disrepair than those.
Right, right. But think about that. Man, if we're going to start thinking about bringing some units back online or creating new units, let's make sure there's a pattern book to guide our builders and developer friends to see what we're looking for when we say we need multifamily and more density.
Here with these forward flexes, or are we talking rehabbing established buildings into forward flexes?
Yes, both. You can do both. We can do adaptive reuse, yes, which is going to need to be larger scale oftentimes because of the cost. But if you had an infill opportunity, and this is one for a builder, I've got an infill opportunity here and I want to put a fourplex in there, what's going to happen with zoning? Usually, right? So your pattern book isn't just about looking at different types and styles of housing. It's saying, could we even do that if we wanted to? If we agree that this is good, have we lined up our own internal policies so that the answer is yes, and go ahead and get started, not, hey, come through this process, which is not you're gonna have to go through this circumventing process because that's not what we set the rules for, and so you're different and you have to go over here and spend more time. No, you create and set the table for that, and we'll talk about table setting. Is there a measure on time? I wanna make sure I know I started late. Okay. And is anyone falling asleep? So here's an example. Northeast Indiana did a countywide housing strategy back in 2018, and found it needed 21,000 households outside of Allen. Okay, outside of it had 21,000 households looking for new and existing housing, swirling around, but this did not include the big county of Allen. They had absorption estimates. So I don't know why Noble's number moved, but you could see each county was told this is how much you would get. And I said, where did you get that number? And I used it for this conversation too. And what you saw in terms of that breakdown of percentages, you want to know why Clay had 4.4, whatever it was? Because that's the total percentage of the total population of the 7-county region. So whatever you were is whatever you'll get. But let's say one of those that's going to get a tiny little bit has a lot of vast area that it wants to develop. Could it absorb where other places might not? Yes, absolutely. And so I said, that's why you have to go and do your own countywide housing strategy, is you need to know what is truly your capacity, because this analysis that you just saw is not your fate. It's simply an extrapolation of what they saw that you already are today. And that works on so many human levels, it's not even funny. So when we think about how the housing strategy process works, you're going to want to put together a steering committee, you're going to have some communication planning, you're going to have your own market potential results that you're doing. Ideally, you'll go out to the community with something like this and talk about what you learned, and then you're going to build your own project pipeline from within that county. And once you get that in place and you start to identify your projects, you're going to need to make sure all your programs are in place. And yes, infrastructure should be one of your programs. And then when you get to the place where you can actually see houses coming out of the ground, you have a big old party and tell everyone there first, because the 63% who already live here you got to make sure they know about it, that they love this. And then you start to talk more broadly about that as well. Certainly employers.
Couple questions.
Yes.
Steering committee,
Yes.
do you include realtors?
Yes.
Okay, what if you have very competitive realtors? And then
Good question.
it's cumbersome as well as developers.
I would ask the Realtors Association and maybe your Home Builders Association to designate someone.
And follow up on your region. 21,000 houses needed 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Have you done a follow-up 18?
Yes, we did. And let me tell you, I'm going to show you a couple of projects, because this will tell you. We are at 5,134 units were built over that 5 years. That was passively. That analysis was done before we had a housing resource hub. 5,134 units of the 15,000. So how many missed opportunities Who knows? Outside of Allen. And when I looked at, okay, well, we needed about 63, 36, something like that, 64, 36% in terms of rental and home buyer. Guess what our percentage was? 94.6. 6% rental. We needed 34 or 36. So we didn't even hit the mark in terms of what was needed. So guess what? All those folks, we don't know where they're at. We don't know. But I'll show you where we're at today. So the Housing Resource Hub kicked off, let's just say in 2020, and all of these counties have active housing strategies, and almost every county is covered, I guess is the point. Whitley, I think, may jump in, and Wells has got something different going on. But every county has its own housing strategy and its own steering committee and its own local folks driving their pipelines. And at the regional level, what's happening? We're putting together huge amounts of resources to make it happen. So catalyst sites, when we talk about this idea of, I'll go back here. So we got these active housing strategies. The catalyst sites are when I talk about where those communities get started, they pick 1, 2, 3, and they prioritize places where we need to develop. Now, when you think of a catalyst, and I loved the titration labs, and the idea of the chemistry that happens when we decide we're going to counteract the forces that are working against housing and actually put in tools and processes and partnerships that are going to actually help us to overcome. What we do is we change the trajectory from the standpoint of when that house that was cost $260 to build sells for $240, the next time, cycle it again. Maybe it's 242, cycle another group. Maybe we've now got to the 260. And so the idea is you're building pipelines. This is a commitment. This is a marriage. And so those catalyst sites become really important because they become your first way, 30 to 40 units typically, to get a project really off the ground of substance that can start to change the comparables and give you some examples for the lending environment, the lending community and their appraisers that yes, in fact, it is sustainable. So when we think about those tools that need to be involved, we have to look at the availability and affordability sides. And on the affordability side, home buyer financing becomes key. And as I mentioned, a lot of today's millennial buyers think that they have to have 20% when they don't have the down payment, have high college debt, and the idea is that part of the work becomes, yes, you can, not just here's a tool to help you do that. On the construction side, as we talked about, infrastructure costs, that's it. If I didn't have to put infrastructure in, I could sell it all day long for what it costs to build it typically. But when you've got millions of dollars of infrastructure costs, and in the case of one development that we have, Legacy Heights in the city of Wabash, Indiana, costs $76,000 a lot to build the lot. And then you build the house on top of it. These are custom builds starting at, the cheapest one is $260,000. So $76,000 to build the lot. What's the market value of the lot when we sell it? Anyone want to guess? 32 to 39? That's what, you're not going to pay that, right? You won't just give that away, right? No builder, no bank. So as we look at infrastructure costs, that's the real gap that we find. And those are real numbers. I can actually show you through a bidding process that, yep, it cost, in this case, $2.5 million before cost escalation, potentially $1 million more a year later. We received READI funds for that deal. Took us a whole year to get the contracts in place, and now cost escalation says we may be paying somewhere closer to $3.5 million. So looking at infrastructure costs becomes really important because that means, it just got worse. So how do we make sure housing's available? We want to size it for the market potential. And then we introduce this idea called patient capital. Banks do not like patient capital. I was told that by a banker. They just do not like that term patient capital. Why? Well, because usually what happens is if we invest, we're not going to see a return on that investment for quite some time. What's one big tool that we have in Indiana that can help with housing that could be a tool for infrastructure that can produce patient capital for us? Residential TIFs. Spot on. All day. In fact, the deal I just told you about, the mayor was ready to release his bonds when we got the READI award. And we then, he's part of his own housing strategy. His city did the housing strategy. They have a pipeline of about 5 projects in a town of 10,000 because he needs 500 units. So yeah, he's then looking at what's my next deal. So catalysts, another wavy line, but we're understanding the community values. We're pulling together typically your, I guess it would be your redevelopment authority is a good partner, the city or the town, and maybe a third party that's an investor, maybe your community foundation. And in that example that I just shared, the community foundation is doing an impact investment to build model units. So there's great ways to bring partners together, and community foundations are typically a part of that. So execute an MOU and you do pre-development services, we get site control, we assemble the development team, do some pre-development work, get that capital stack finalized, and it's a go, no go decision. Because all we've done is to de-risk for our developer partner. Developers in the room again? Anyone stand in the shoes of a developer where you invest at risk and then potentially do a deal? Thank you. If a community said, we'd love to work with you, we love your product, and if you're willing to be our unpaid consultant to guide us through this process, we'll put up the money it takes to do all the due diligence, and we're contributing some land and potentially a residential TIF. Is that anywhere close to what you would ever work with? Because I understand you do nice, you would. That is what communities are doing. They're right-sizing the investment. They're getting into the deal and they're saying, this is what I want for my community, and this is what the developer I want to work with can do, and we're going to push these things together by bringing our banks and our builders and our, all kinds of partners, our community foundations to the table. And yes, we can at the end lose the money we've invested, but at least we had a go, no go decision with a partner that was willing to go with us if we could do it. I can tell you we've had no goes so far. So I won't belabor this because I was late, but there's processes you walk through to do that. But and then this is what you do. So who knows how to do this? Who's really good at this in the room that does this for a living? Nobody. That is what the optimizer does. And it's why I laugh, because if you get really good at this, you're really good at losing money if you're a private sector partner. And if you get really good at this and you're in government, government's not supposed to be a developer. It's why an optimizer is really needed. Nonprofits have a very big role in housing and can play a huge role in catalyst projects because they essentially do this with the development partner in tow, because their goal is not to get to be a builder. I don't need to be a builder. But I do need to make sure that the city or the town that's investing in this, that their investment is right-sized. So we've got 500 plus housing units now in various stages of development. I'd say there's probably 5 more that we can add to that list now of projects that are ongoing in each of those counties that decided to take action. And it's just crazy to watch. Lots of riverfront development in places like Decatur and downtown development in places like Huntington. So I'm going to give you an example though. How many are familiar with LaGrange, Indiana? LaGrange County and LaGrange. Okay, yes. What do you think of when you think of LaGrange? Farming. Yeah. So this is the big intersection in Topeka. And this is a community within, the county. They did a county-wide housing strategy led by their economic development folks and a bank. Actually, the bank brought everyone together, and economic development helped to lead the charge. But what we learned was LaGrange County could support 325 to 475 new housing units, and they had to extrapolate because you have Amish and English in LaGrange County, right? So we had to cut out the Amish population because they don't play by the same rules. So we only looked at the English population and how their buyer and renter habits look, and 325 to 475 is what was decided countywide. Topeka is a town of 1,000 people that every day grows to 5,000. These employers are busing people from places as far away as Fort Wayne. The town manager and his board were desperate to see something happen, and they went and bought a huge plot of land, something like 50 acres, and paid a pretty penny for it. I think $1.25 million, which is really cheap nowadays. But this is the piece of land they bought. And so they thought, okay, we're just going to flip this thing. I got this developer that says he wants to build really nice units, and so we're going to put this up. And they had 3 or 4 developers respond, and the answer was, you have to give us the land. We will not be buying it for the $1.25 you have into it, and we're going to need some extra money for infrastructure and soil instability issues. So the Housing Resource Hub there worked with that committee, town manager, and his council, his attorney, and the community laid out with the architects that were brought onto the team, and they selected a developer and built this idea. So this is one chance, this town, and this is walkable to their downtown. What we have are family homes, lake cottages, villas, pocket neighborhoods. What are those? What do those represent, those names, those housing types and styles? Densities. And so those types and styles were aligned with the market potential analysis. And of course, the price points were key in terms of the sizes of those. And so at the end of the day, this development literally is going to kick off in the next 30 days, I suppose we'll break ground. Yeah.
So where did they get the funding to afford the land, to afford the infrastructure that they demanded? Was that ready?
No. Most communities don't have that kind of cash and aren't willing to do it. I think this was really, they're like, look, we've got to do something. So they had cash, probably edit, something like that, went and bought the land. But then the question was, okay, we've got this residential TIF tool. I wish I had my board, but that site is 151 units. Oh, let me get back to that. 151 units. And if they built, we're going to build it in 2 phases, but if you build that whole thing out and they ran the TIF run for us, so you can do a TIF run, ask for that, $6 million is what the conservative estimate of the real estate taxes that would be collected on that area look like. So we're talking 5,000 people during the day that work at their employers. What is that also going to bring in once those buyers start buying? Income taxes, exactly. And so this becomes a really interesting concept to discuss. Now I'm going to show you another one really quickly. Town of LaGrange. This is, I wanted to share, they're both in the same county, same market potential, same process, corner of 9 and 20. Their most highly traveled corridor throughout the entire county. This is the county where Shipshewana is, so it's this is a big place where people come and visit. But this is the corner of 9 and 20. Community Foundation gave a building, but all of this had to be assembled. So what do you do when you want to see a project happen? We have this meeting, you're like, oh, I've got this great piece of property I want over there. Do you just go shout it from the rooftops? No. We had to go and get options on all of those pieces of land to do our due diligence, because what happens when people find out that you want to build somewhere? Yeah, price goes up, or it becomes unavailable. So got all the options in place, did the environmental testing, because there was a former, if you want to, there was a former gas station there. Everything you could imagine went wrong, could go wrong, kind of did go wrong. But this is the concept, and this is in alignment with their downtown, their existing downtown. But the idea that this will have retail and residential above the retail, it's got a lot of the amenities, but as you see across the back, more density, but these are townhomes that will be sold. They had to address some of the site topography issues, so you've got some parking situation where you can park below the building, but as you can see, they envisioned it. So Topeka's project, $50 million project in Topeka, Indiana. This $21 million project at the corner of 9 and 20 in LaGrange County. This deal is still getting done. So that capital stacking is still going. So that's that design. So the last piece I want to talk about, and does someone have the time? Minute and a half? Whew. I thought, I did it. I knew it. I knew that was going to happen. So we've said it already, and I've said it several times. You've said it. The role of the public partner becomes paramount here. Because if government doesn't get involved, all of the processes that government controls and all of the rules that government sets around mortgages and lending, all of those things work against what we're trying to do here, even if we know we've got paying customers who've showed up at the door. And if you're like Wabash, I told you about that Legacy Heights project, we had the mayor go out and do a little, we launched a down payment assistance program that any county can authorize here. And didn't cost him anything, but we did do some social media around it. He's highly followed. He's, I guess, an influencer. And we use this cool tool that we'll use here called Club 720. 720 means the credit score, but it's really like an Amazon where you bring on buyers who want to buy and you bring them to banks and lenders who are offering different types of mortgage products, down payment assistance, credit builder loans if you're not ready. So the idea was, okay, so we go out and announce this program. We do a Facebook Live with Mayor Long, and over 100 people come on the platform. I mean, these individuals are coming on ready to go get their mortgage. I want to buy in Wabash. And today, because that project is actually breaking ground in the next 30 days, we've got more than that, more buyers than that. But what was interesting was we have buyers from California, from Texas, from all these different places. Remember that 18%? Other areas, other areas in the U.S., balance of the U.S. is showing up, and it's true. There are people who could live anywhere, but they want to live in Wabash. So the role of the public partner becomes really critical on a lot of different levels. First is table setting. We've talked about it, but building codes and regulations, zoning codes need to align. So if you do a countywide housing strategy, I always recommend update your comprehensive plan. Make sure you've got an updated comprehensive plan with the housing element because that informs your zoning code. So use it as part of your planning process to set the table, roll out the red carpet. You might have to refine some of your building codes and regulations. It's almost like, yeah, I know what's going on here. It's everywhere. But we want to remove obstacles. We want to de-risk. So how do we de-risk? Well, we don't want regulatory delays, so how do we make sure that permitting process is working well? We want to make sure that the local unit is actually participating in meaningful ways. I have one community where the mayor is so convinced that what he's going to do is going to be successful, he is all in. And that developer could not be more grateful to be a part of a process where his team is giving their time, talent, and treasures to help define what this project's going to look like, knowing that at the end of the day, you've got a public partner who's saying, let's figure out how we're going to do it. What resources do I have? What resources do you have? What does the business community have? And so making sure that there's this relationship that makes sense. This dual role is the importance of having a nonprofit optimizer in the middle. For those who understand land development, what happens if the government gives a private developer a piece of land? Let's say that's part of how you're going to underwrite the infrastructure. I'm going to give them this piece of land that the city or town owns. There are tax consequences to that developer. So but if you work with a nonprofit optimizer, in this case, that's kind of helped to right-size the community's investment, you can actually send that piece of land through the nonprofit to the project, and those tax consequences don't exist. So that meaningful relationship of a nonprofit. So more ways, strategically invest those scarce public sector scarce public sector funds. So truly looking at cash. I mean, it's going to cost about $50,000 to do a pre-development project, to do pre-development on a project, to get to that no-go or go decision. And so there's a chance you could lose that money, but chances are, if you assemble the right team, it will move forward. Then you'll get it back in spades. Offer less complex financial packages. If you're going to do that and then you decide you're going to make it really difficult, even though you don't have to, or over-regulate your funds, sometimes that will cause developers to say, I'm not interested. But as we look at how we see this in our environment where we are today and the different types of resources that are available, I've found that there's no lack of different types of tools that could be used. Especially, again, if you've got like that nonprofit optimizer, there are tools at the state level that I didn't even know were available to do multifamily development that can be done with a nonprofit. And then finally, identifying your tools, TIF, ARPA, other types of infrastructure funds as ways that you can start getting invested. So some of those tools, as I've mentioned, residential TIF, commercial TIF, ARPA, READI, EDIT, other incentives that you can put in. I don't know if other ones come to mind, and then on the developer side, that contribution of time and talent to ride along on the project, that first Wabash project that I told you, that developer was selected back in 2019, and they're just now getting started. Now, have all the other ones, are they going faster? Yes. Is having READI funds available a big, great thing for us to be able to use? Yes. But the point is there are ways that developers can get involved, but in Northeast Indiana, there are regional organization, the Regional Economic Development Organization that works on talent attraction, talent recruitment, collaborated with the hub and said, look, our CEOs in the region have chosen housing as their #1 priority. That's how big this is to employers. And they said, we're willing to come around the table and figure out some of these non-traditional tools and resources. I mentioned earlier, master lease agreements, maybe loan loss reserve funds that you can create. Things like using those kinds of tools that may not be much to that employer to be able to offer it, but they're so invested in wanting to see it done at the regional level that they're now looking at labor shed areas. Where are we seeing lots of where are the high labor shed areas, and should those not be the places where we start to look for housing? So I'm going to wrap it up. Actually, there's a lot more to this. I'll say there's lots of ways you can get involved in the affordability side. Employers are giving cash contributions more and more these days. Employer-assisted housing. Land donation can actually make housing more affordable. Construction financing, it was the other option we talked about with the community foundation, was you want to make an impact investment, be our construction financier, right? You get your money back, you're getting a nice interest rate, but you're also contributing to something really important in the community. And then of course there are the direct assistance types that you can look at. So the idea is that we really want to look at ways that we can start to build this big pipeline of houses, because we need thousands, right? Not just even a few hundred, to not just stem the decline in population, but actually grow and actually attract the folks that are looking to live here. I guess the question that I have is, after hearing all of this, do you still think it's impossible? Do you still think that this isn't going to happen? Because I think if there's one thing that distinguishes every other community from the one where it didn't happen, it was mindset. It was, I believed it wasn't going to happen, and it didn't. I believed it was going to happen, and it did. So whether you believe it can happen or whether you believe it can't, you're right. So what do you think?
I have a question about your public input into this. So like you mentioned that Topeka, Kansas, where the city bought the land for $1.5 million, and
Yeah.
they generated what, $6 million in tax revenue.
So no, that's a good question. It was Topeka, Indiana, believe it or not. But no, what we said was, when we took that design with all the houses on it, I call it a TIF run is what I would call it. We went to the financial advisor for the community and said, take all of these units and look at the state laws around taxes and tell us, if we built this on a schedule, we know we're not going to drop in 150 units in 1 year. So build it over a very conservative schedule. So we did 10 years. What would be the TIF income over that period if they wanted to issue a bond, for instance? And the answer was $6 million.
So why wouldn't a government agency want to go in and replicate that in other areas? I mean, is it just the return?
It's hard. And you really do need people that know planners, doers, housers, professionals who can walk them through it, because it's extremely risky, number one. But as I showed you, it's all there. It's just being really responsible with those public funds so that you're right sizing the deal. I love to work with bankers who will come to the table and say, this is the best term sheet I can offer. So that when that developer says there's a gap of X, if that term sheet is actually better and they don't want to work with our local banker, we're only going to invest what you need. And so right sizing that investment is, and then you saw that big set of boxes. It's not for the faint at heart. And to the gentleman, behind you who said, it is hard to be a builder. I personally can say, after having done quite a bit of this work, it is extremely hard. So the idea that we're now bringing a government entity together where we've got public policy we need to protect, and the private sector together where we need to build that trust between the two. And then at the end of the day, we have to serve these individuals who need to be able to buy or rent it. It's just a lot of work. And how many communities here have a housing department? None. So that becomes then the capacity issue that plagues most communities. But thanks to Thrive and all you're doing, and to bring this together, to kick this off, and then, as I mentioned, technical assistance, yes. Excuse me.
So one of the, just my observation, maybe I'm biased, but one of the interesting side effects of the housing shortage and the last several years, at least in Terre Haute, it seems like there's been a resurgence of flipping.
Yes.
And
good point.
old stock, which we have the oldest housing stock in the state of Indiana,
Yes.
has become desirable to people who are putting small teams together, going in, flipping houses one at a time. And I understand it may not solve your massive scale problem, but.
That's the small scale developer.
Right.
Okay, there's one thing. Are you going to say? You go ahead. Tell me.
I was going to say that the one thing that's, I'm reading in tea leaves here, I'm looking at this, lots of money being targeted towards new urban sprawl.
Oh, all of those deals downtowns. Good point. They're all inside down, walkable to downtown, in downtown.
But the, or new bills, call them what you want, but I guess my question is, how do you, I think that's a beautiful thing to see, a 1940s house turn beautiful again, old meets new.
Yes.
And how do you think that impacts that market, so to speak, and then all these new homes come on?
Actually, it's a great way. You need the program, the small scale developer program. I think you need, it's kind of like, have you ever seen Stephen Covey's kind of like the big rocks, the sand, the pebbles, then the water. The big rocks are the catalyst because you need hundreds and thousands of units. So you're going to have to do some big scale. And yes, it should be in close proximity to downtown. It should reuse existing infrastructure. But beyond that, we do need the rocks and the pebbles to surround it. That's the small scale developer programs. That's the upper floor conversion programs that are onesie twosies, and they're the local folks that are probably already doing it. We just need to make sure that we can capacitize that part of the industry as well while we're doing this. So I think they work in tandem and they work together really well. What I thought you were going to mention, and I think this is something you have to think about, when that, let's say, empty nester retiree decides in Wabash, I'm going to sell my big old house and I'm going to move to Legacy Heights into one of those new units. I want more accessibility, single floor. What's happening is that when they decide to sell, they figure out, oh, I could rent that thing for $1,500 a month. I don't even have a mortgage. Now all of a sudden, guess what happens? It either becomes part of serving that group or it doesn't. And so there are some really kind of cool ways you can build programs around that. Actually, a gentleman at Pathfinders that I talked to recently up in Huntington, Indiana, talked about, just like you do the push it, pull it, drag it with your car, it's kind of the push it, pull it, drag it with your house. So when you're buying one of our new houses, we want to make sure that that house gets flipped by one of our partners that becomes another home buyer unit, not becomes a verbo, scenario, which is what's happening in some parts of the state. So, yeah.
I understand that I'm here getting in for our county council, and I think we need to change some paradigms. I agree, but I think everybody has to. It can't just be one party. It
Yes.
can't be just us trying to fix everything, and we're gonna make it easy for everybody else.
Yep.
Everybody else has got to shift gears and shift the paradigm too.
Yep.
So the way that they've always built, the way they've always done things is not always going to be.
Yes. And that idea that we're all going to try to do some things differently is really, it's the heart of what we're talking about. That pattern book, we want the builders and developers to understand how to build a different kind of product potentially. But yes, I agree. So this can't be your last conversation. This has to be the first. We now know. If we didn't know we had almost 5,000 units sitting out there that we should create and we're missing out on 5,000 opportunities, that would be one thing, but now we know. And so taking action becomes the next step. And again, there's lots of ways to do that, and yeah.
So your upper floor conversion renovation programs, so excluding Vigo County, so some of the other counties, their downtowns, you drive through them, have a lot of older buildings, a lot of rundown buildings, because people don't have the funds to keep them up.
Yes. Yes.
So somebody goes to buy those, and you're talking about $500,000 to $1 million maybe in renovation costs. How do you influence the investor, the real estate investor, or the commercial client to come in and buy that building and renovate it?
They won't right now. What you do is you use the optimizer to get the site control. You bring that partner who's willing and has a really good track record of doing it well to come to the table. And what I'm finding is if that community just bought the whole block and put it up under a request for proposals, it would go nowhere. But if that community partnered and and assembled the project, right, before we even go talk to anyone, we assembled it and we put together a pre-development budget and said, hey, we're in. These are the types of resources we'll bring to the table, but you're going to be part of our party, not us coming to yours. They will do it. But they need to know that they've got a partner who has the ability to bring other resources to the table and to, Mayor Long that I talked about, he'll get on the phone and talk about stormwater. That's a big deal. When your mayor gets on the phone, your boss, the mayor, calls you about your stormwater situation, you answer. That's a different conversation. And so I think it's this idea of governments taking and putting on a bit of a different hat. At the same time, developers have to do the same thing. Yeah.
In Greencastle, we have started doing residential tax abatement instead of TIF, because TIF locks it up for 30 years. And tax abatement, it stays in over 10, and so some of our taxing units then are being impacted. I find that that's being used at all in your region, and so how is that working?
I analyzed a tax abatement versus a TIF recently.
Yeah.
And we're talking pennies versus hundreds, or in this case, $10,000 of tax abatement, but they needed $1 million in infrastructure. So we can do what I call it's an orchestra of public financing, and I would love, we can have a little session on this, but tax abatement is great in certain circumstances, but for the level of what we need, abating a tax is one thing. I'm paying so much in taxes every year. But TIF says this piece of land is not generating but $2 every year right now because of it's in government ownership. And when we build on top of it, it's now going to generate, in the case of Topeka, $50 million worth of new investment. But we cannot build that $50 million of new investment unless we put that infrastructure in. So $6 million of infrastructure got them $44 million in new investment. And so, yes, I can see it would impact a taxing unit, but it's a if. Because if you don't build it, you don't get it, right? I mean, I'm probably setting off a lot of people around TIF with talking about like that, but.
Push back on that, though, because they're saying, they might get students, and that's what they're hoping for.
Yes,
But
yes.
they're pushing back on having that tax structure long term.
Well, one of the things I would look at is the population decline. Remember, more people It's it's likely more people are passing away than children are being born. What we're saying is the people who want to come live here are the people who are going to create and fill your schools. So rather than treat it as, I would take it the same thing with the deal. I would look at it as, how many units are we going to construct? What is that going to look like in terms of the number of families? From, almost like when you do an annexation plan. If we build this many, this is how many you're going to see year over year over year. And we start to look at the financial details and not look at it as, don't look at the tool, look at the financials themselves and as it relate to the deal. Because I think at the end of the day, there are ways to make it work. That's what I would say. I know Topeka actually did some conversations and created a legal document with the schools that satisfied them. So, other questions, comments? Okay, well, I thank you for your time, and it's been a pleasure, definitely.
Wow, lots of information today. Let's have another round of applause for Heather. Thank you all so much for coming and kind of participating in this marathon of information. I hope you found it valuable. And at the end of this, I'm going to be around, and Heather's going to stick around, and we're going to have other members. So if you want to chat and talk shop about some projects, we're happy to do so. But I'm super excited. I think that we have tons of potential within this area. I think we have more potential in the last few years within our region than I think what we've seen in the last 35 years, with opportunities through READI, with new companies coming into our region, with the potential for new housing. So this is just the start of this conversation. So next steps, we're looking at the 24th of July is when applications are due for the READI Homes for the Future program. So if you need help or assistance, technical assistance with that application, reach out to me, reach out to Thrive offices, and we will get you set up to help you with that application to get it submitted on time. In addition, we will be looking at local market potential analysis for Clay County and Vigo County. Those are the two counties within our region that jumped on this bandwagon that Heather showed initially of how we start to build that roadmap for those two communities. We are eager to have other communities come on board with that, but Clay County and Vigo County look to be finished up somewhere around the end of July, and then those analysis and those plans will start to shape up in the upcoming months. So we'll be working with those communities hand in hand with all their key stakeholders to build out really great local housing strategies for the next months to come, and setting up new builder and incentive programs for those communities as well, with some additional ARPA funding and other local tax dollars. So lots of things on the horizon. Continue to check back on the Thrive website. We'll keep it updated. If you have questions, don't be a stranger. Just reach out to any of us, and you will get you connected to the right person who can answer your question, and we'll help you be successful, because we are all about building new houses and renovating old units and getting more people to live within our region and seeing our population grow. So thank you all so much for coming today.